made short work of Mississippi State in the USA on Saturday, and now it's time for the grand finale of Texas Tech basketball season. Chris Beard returns to the USA for what will be a historic matchup. We're going to start taking a look at the Longhorns coming up on today's Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Texas Tech, a member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. I'm Ryan Mainville. I cover Texas Tech for the Dallas Morning News. I'm joined by Emery Lida, a longtime Texas Tech analyst, writer, and podcaster, and a good friend of mine. Today, we are beginning to take a look at the Longhorns and what Texas will be bringing to Lubbock on Tuesday. Obviously, a game with a lot of excitement and anticipation around it, so we don't want to waste any time getting into that. But we also got to talk a little bit about Texas Tech's win over Mississippi State on Saturday before we get into any of that. Emery, how you doing, man? How was your weekend? Did you enjoy the Texas Tech absolute beatdown?
Man, that was just fun to watch. At the end of the day, being able to just walk away from a team that was pretty decent in Mississippi State, that's something that you can't take for granted. I mean, you look at all the other Big 12 SEC challenge games, and for the most part, they were going down to the wire. At a minimum, you had some sort of doubt coming into the last few minutes about who was going to win the game. And this one, once Tech got a big lead into halftime and started the second half, well, it was clear that Mississippi State was just totally outmatched. And it's nice to have one of those blowout wins. I feel like the conference slate has been a bit of a gauntlet, especially against teams like Kansas and Baylor, especially coming off of the Monday night game in Allen Fieldhouse. So to be able to just cruise away with a victory, it felt really nice to be able to watch. And obviously, just being able to see the offense flow really well, the defense for about 34 minutes there, completely stifling what Mississippi State was able to do, couldn't be any better. And I think that it just continues to show that we have Mississippi State's number, whether it be in football, basketball, and hopefully in baseball this year.
Yeah, and I mean, we both were pretty confident about this game coming into it. I mean, I mentioned this was a profile of a team that Texas Tech had done well against this season. These teams that really struggled to score on the perimeter and rely a lot on the inside. Texas Tech, but I mean, they thrashed them, man. I don't think either of us were expecting a win this big. The Red Raiders ended up winning 76-50, and somehow in a 26-point game, that doesn't even feel like as close as it was. I mean, the Red Raiders just completely controlled this game for pretty much all 40 minutes. They totally outmanned them in the paint. I think Texas Tech finished with 46 points in the paint to Mississippi State's like 14 or 16. So absolute domination inside from Texas Tech once again. They rebounded well. That was something I mentioned as a key to the game against this team, was making sure that they don't get any easy ones. They did that. They allowed easy ones at the beginning of the game. That got cleaned up really, really quickly. And then they slowed down Iverson Molinar, who was a big cause of concern for me coming into this game, just with how well he had been scoring, especially in his last outing against Kentucky. But Texas Tech really just shut him down and held him to 12 points on 5 of 10 shooting and 5 turnovers. So, I mean, really, the Red Raiders did just about everything that you could ask for. But is there anything specifically that you took away from this game and you were like, this is indefinitely a positive going forward for Texas Tech?
I think it has to be the ease that Tech was able to get into the paint. And I feel like we saw a lot of guys take their turn at being a primary ball handler and lead initiator. I mean, Malik Wilson got more minutes in this one than I think he's gotten at a minimum since the first Kansas game, and I believe that's the most he's gotten since he came back. And his comfort level as a ball handler was really on display. And just in general, we saw that with Adonis Arms in the first half as well, and the ability to get pressure on the rim. It did so much in terms of allowing the court to open up. You weren't really relying on a lot of post-up actions, and it really helped out everyone because there were more assists in this game that came off of dump-off passes and really just getting to the inside and interior passes than what I can remember from recent games, and certainly against Kansas or dating back to the West Virginia game. And so I think the ball movement and ability to get into the paint off of drives was something that was new in this game. And I think it's something that's a good sign going forward, especially if TJ Shannon's continuing to deal with some back spasms. And as Kevin McCullough still doesn't quite look like he's got the burst that he had prior to the ankle injury, just having the ability for those guys like a Wilson and Arms or a Davion Warren to be able to get into the paint and effectively create for both themselves and other people, I think you can look at that as a huge strength going forward, especially considering you're going up against Texas next, and you've got a slew of Big 12 teams that are really good at keeping teams from being able to post up effectively or get open looks on the perimeter.
Yeah, it was a really impressive game by Texas Tech. I mean, really offensively for me. I know that the defense played just phenomenally in this game. I mean, they took away everything from Mississippi State, and it was a gauntlet for them. But the offense, something about it just looked different than we had seen kind of in the past few games. The ball was moving a lot easier, a lot better. The Red Raiders were getting to the rim really, really well. As you mentioned, I think Davion Warren had like 3 possessions in a row where he just took the ball right to the basket. That was really encouraging. It felt like it had been a while since we had seen some of that. Obviously, Malik Wilson starting to heal up again. He actually played 22 minutes in that last Kansas game, which does not feel like a thing that happened, but the box score reads it. But he hadn't played over double-digit minutes until obviously that first Kansas game. So he's getting healthier. That's big for this Red Raider team. They need playmaking. Bryson Williams looked pretty good, 10 points. I had him as my player of the game. He was not. Malik Wilson was really good with 12 points. Kevin O'Banner just continuing to be just Mr. Production for this team. I mean, what an asset this guy has been, and you just got to give a hand to his versatility and adapting his role. Really, he's like rewritten his entire identity as a basketball player. The shots have stopped going in for Kevin O'Banner, and he's just made a living for himself under the basket. Now, in this one, he went 2 of 4 from deep, and that's something that, we want to celebrate, and we want to continue to see that happen for Kevin O'Banner. But for him to just bang around down low, to score easy baskets, that's huge. And you're going to take that offensive production any night you can get it. But player of the game, man, for me, it's got to be Adonis Arms. And I think that, Kevin O'Banner is a close second for me because Arms did not score. He scored 1 point in the second half, and O'Banner was just so good. But Arms, man, 15 points in that first half, 5 assists to 1 turnover. He ended the game with 7 assists and 3 turnovers. 4 stocks. The dude was he was on fire. Hit a pull-up jumper from the mid-range, I think on the first or second offensive possession of the game, and you could just tell, like, it was his day. And so with TJ Shannon down right now, Mark Adams gave a really disheartening update about TJ after the game and his media availability. He said that there was a chance that TJ would play on Tuesday against Texas, which is not super encouraging. But if Adonis Arms continues to play like this, I think the Red Raiders are in good shape. Obviously, you want TJ Shannon back on the court, but what Arms did against Mississippi State, I mean, that is unreal production.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go as far and say that the team is better off without TJ. I think that's a ridiculous take.
No question. No,
But
that's a horrible
yeah,
argument.
yeah. But with that said, I think that if you're going to get one of the most efficient nights of production from Adonis Arms that we've seen in a while, both offensively and defensively, I mean, that's going to more than make up for TJ's absence. So if Arms continues to be as good as he was on both ends, and I think that's the thing for me. Defensively was the biggest surprise. We've seen Arms have the offensive games where he's gone off and looked efficient and looked like Tech's best offensive player at points. But what we haven't seen is his defense just being able to really rise to the occasion. And after a game against Kansas where we noted that he had multiple lapses, and I feel like that contributed to Mark Adams not playing him as much in the second half, his ability to really be a disruptor, the 2 back-to-back blocks that he had, mixed in with a turnover on his end that was him doing a little bit too much, but still having those back-to-back blocks and just in general off the ball, he was nearly flawless in this game. I think that this was a really good showcase for him. And I mean, TJ's got some ability that you're not going to be able to replicate. His off-ball defensive awareness and really his defense in general is among the top 3 on the team. And offensively, I still like his ability to get to the rim, and just his ability to finish is something that you don't really see very often. But I mean, if Arms is going to play this well and as a team, you're going to be able to get as much offensive production as you can. I mean, missing TJ isn't going to be the end of the world. And I mean, I feel like this was as good of an offensive game as Tech has played in a while, just across the board. There weren't many weren't many possessions where I looked back at and I saw that they were completely wasted. And even though you ended up with 16 turnovers, it wasn't like live ball, bad decision type turnovers. There were a lot of plays where it was just simple mistakes that happen that can get cleaned up.
Ball was moving really, really well in this one, and I'm with you. I think we've both been adamant that like we don't think that TJ is bad. We don't think that he deserves to sit on the bench. But if he's struggling because he's injured, I think a lot of people are really quick to forget that. If he's struggling, if he's not being the same player, you got to give Adonis Arms more than 11 minutes, and that's what we saw. And that was a really good decision by Mark Adams because it paid off. And so Adonis Arms continuing to stay in the fold. Obviously, that's one of the greatest challenges of coaching is getting everybody involved, keeping everybody happy, keeping your entire team productive, even when the ball's in so many different places. But if Adonis Arms can continue some of that success, Texas Tech will be in really good shape. I wish that we could talk so much more about Mississippi State, but we have got to start breaking down the biggest game of Texas Tech's season. But first, a word from our sponsors. Hey Red Raiders, this is Ryan with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about, GetUpside. My listeners are earning cash back for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free GetUpside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. Use promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon cash back or more on your first fill up. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore, get cash back using GetUpside. Just download the app for free and use promo code SCORE for 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a year in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free GetUpside app and use promo code SCORE to get 25 cents per gallon or more cash back on your first tank. That's code SCORE. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, and we've got to do it. It's time to start. It's time to continue to just dig into the Longhorns. We got our feet wet on Friday. Took a short look at them, but these next 2 days, we're leaning in. We're starting to break down this team in its entirety before the first matchup between Texas Tech and Texas this season. Obviously, with it being at the USA, which is already drawing overnight campers from the student section. Just an unbelievable scene in Lubbock right now, and it's well deserving. This game is going to be madness. But on paper, Longhorns have had a bit of an interesting season. They are 16-5 on the year. Really, their best wins are probably have come in the last week. I thought that 23-point win against TCU was impressive. Then they beat Tennessee somehow last night or on Saturday night at the Frank Irwin Center. I think they were up 16 at one point and scored 1 point in the final 7 minutes of the game and won by a 1-point margin. So they just squeaked out of there with a win. But a win's a win, and it works on their resume. The Longhorns are currently 15th in KenPom. They are 45th in offense and 11th in defense. They are the number one defense in terms of points per game allowed. I think Emery and I would both say let's use rate stats any day of the week instead of raw data. I know that a lot of people really love to use that raw data stat on the Longhorns, but their strength of schedule is not great. And who are they led by? Who's their coach again?
Never heard of him. It's a guy named Chris, but it doesn't ring a bell to me.
No idea. But he sure did put on a show for Rick Barnes on Saturday at the Frank Irwin Center. But Emery, I'm sure you've watched a lot of Texas basketball this season. I know you love college basketball. What have you seen from the Longhorns? Give the people your analysis.
Okay, so offensively, it can be a train wreck to watch at times. They've done some nice things. They have a lot of talented players, and we'll get into that in the next segment. But guys like Marcus Carr, Trey Mitchell, Timmy Allen, Christian Bishop, etc., all of those guys have a lot of skills. And offensively, at points, they've looked pretty good. I mean, they've had certainly some efficient 2-point games. They've looked at times like a team that has been on the verge of putting it all together. Against TCU, they had a really nice offensive night, but then there's also times when they're prone to go through 5-6 minute stretches where nothing can go right for them. And if that sounds familiar, it's because we've seen that before at Tech over the last few years. But this year with Texas, they have kind of a tendency to go offensively into spurts where either they're not able to get the ball into the post, which is a huge emphasis for them between Timmy Allen and occasionally a guy like Trey Mitchell. Those guys are really post-centric in what Chris Beard asks them to do. And as a general rule, they play good offense at times, but ultimately they just have those stretches where nothing can get right. They turn the ball over a fair bit. Their shooting is not great. That's at least compared to what Tech has seen in Big 12 play. They're probably one of the worst shooting teams in the conference. Andrew Jones not being on for a good portion of the year has really kind of played into that. And I mean, those guys like Jones and Courtney Ramey we've seen in the past, Brock Cunningham, but then the transfers have just made it to where offensively this team hasn't been able to gel. But defensively they're legitimately really good. And even with the rate stats not being quite as good as what the raw stats look like, they're still top 10 across the board in a lot of metrics. They make life really miserable for ball handlers, really good at forcing turnovers. And then beyond that, their ability to switch is impressive. It's very much a defense that we've seen Mark Adams run at Texas Tech. And with Texas, I mean, the personnel they have, they're kind of a little bit short on just pure wings. But aside from that, you've got the guard defenders that are really good. And just in general, the team does a good job of keeping drivers out of the paint. So it's a really good defensive team, but offensively it can be painful to watch. And certainly games like Seton Hall and even the Tennessee game on Saturday night were examples of where the offense just completely sputtered. And in the Tennessee game, it almost cost them the game. Against Seton Hall, it did cost them.
Yeah, you mentioned an interesting point that they're a little bit small on the perimeter. That's why both of us were really surprised when Jalen Tyson wasn't getting as many minutes as we would have expected. But I mean, I'm with you. Defensively, they're good. I mean, they look good. They're running the no middle defense. That's clear as day. If you watch any of their games, they're running some variation of it. And it's been working for them. They've got some good individual defenders. Their bigs move pretty well on the perimeter. They're not the most athletic team in the world, but they do move decently. Timmy Allen's pretty good about that. Trey Mitchell obviously is just a freak, but this team, man, the raw stats are good. I mean, they slow you down. They are allowing opponents to shoot just 50 shots per game, which is nuts.
Yeah, I'm telling you, this is their pace of play at times. You have to have a good offensive game against them to get over 60 a lot of times. And it's not even about Texas playing great defense, which they are a great defensive team. But when you have games where they're forcing opponents to only have 57 possessions like they did against Tennessee, I mean, Texas has gone virtually the entire season without having a game with 70 or more possessions. And really the only couple of times that that's happened are in non-conference against teams that are able to run up the pace and also turn the ball over a lot. Like outside of that, if it's a half court game, you're not going to get more than 63, 64 possessions against them. And I mean, you think that Tech likes to play slow. Texas is somehow even slower. I mean, they're getting close to Tony Bennett at Virginia type of numbers when you look at it.
Yeah, Texas Tech fans, if you hated the motion offense during the Chris Beard era, you have no idea what it's like now because it is snail pace. I mean, the Longhorns are shooting 53.9 shots per game. That's 334th out of 358 Division 1 basketball teams. They are playing so slow. And I'll be honest, I'll put my cards on the table. This offense is bad. It's bad. There's a lot of individual good pieces, but it has not manifested in a way for me to really give it any respect at this point. I mean, you look across the board, and they just don't do anything well. They shoot free throws pretty well. I think that's impressive. They shoot all right on the inside. They don't shoot the three super well. They're not a great offensive rebounding team. They turn it over quite a bit. I'm not impressed. I don't think their offense is good, but their defense is so good that they're going to be in the fight every single night. I mean, you look at their last 3 games. Oklahoma State, they were up big early in that one, let go of it, still won. Final score 56-51. They go to Fort Worth, they play TCU, have their best offensive performance of the season, win 73-50. And then obviously that Tennessee game on Saturday night, they win 52-51. And so, I mean, you heard Mark Adams talking before the Kansas game and him saying, we need 70 points if we're going to win this game. For Texas, it might be 60. This team is going to want to put you in a rock fight, and that's why I'm really, really interested to see Texas Tech face up against them.
I'm just saying, it would not surprise me if we get a final score in the 40s. Now, would I put money on that happening? No, because I don't think it will be that low scoring. But you're talking about a team that has seemingly been in a rock fight a good 60 to 80% of the games that they've been in this season. I mean, even games where offensively they were able to have decent outings, you're still ending up in games in the mid-60s. Like the Kansas State game, they played well offensively relative to their standards, but still ended up only scoring 65. And TCU, I watched that game. That was about as efficient as they've looked the entire season, and they put up 73. Like, this team goes slow. They're not particularly efficient with their possessions. They turn the ball over quite a bit. They're not an electric shooting 3-point team. So even when they have efficient nights, a lot of it comes from the two point range and just being able to kind of outwill teams on the inside. So I mean, I'm with you. I'm not a huge fan of this offense, but I think defensively they're really good, and we'll see. I mean, could be headed for a 49-44 type of night, or who knows? Maybe they'll pick one night to finally go off on offense and actually make a fun offensive game.
Yeah, I don't know what the total is at right now, but I'd be comfortable suggesting that, hey, you might want to consider whatever the under is in this game because the defense is just gonna be it's just gonna be ridiculous. But I don't know, man. We're gonna take a look at some of their individual players because the Longhorns, as I mentioned, have some names, and we're just kind of waiting to see them take a step up. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours are about getting fit or eating healthier, be sure that you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easier to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good you're going to want to eat it. Unlike other protein bars, which can be chalky or waxy or taste like a chemical skill, you want to eat healthy, but it just gets boring. Trust me, I've been there. By week 3, you're probably thinking this just isn't worth it. Where's the chocolate? Well, guess what? Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. And there are so many different flavors to choose from. You've got coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and many more. You'll never get bored. In fact, Built is always coming out with new limited time flavors, so check out Built.com often to see what's new. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com today. Texas versus Texas Tech. Absolute mayhem will ensue. But a great basketball game will be on our hands, I think. And a lot of that is because I think both of these teams have a number of good players. And with Texas, they've garnered almost all of them from the transfer portal. And easily, in my opinion, the most important addition to this team has been Timmy Allen. He's averaging about 11.8 points per game. But that just, I mean, that tells you with how slow this team plays, 11.8 points per game does not sound good. But watching this team, it feels like he is everything for them on offense. I mean, they feed this dude in the post. He gets almost everything underneath the basket. He's got a good mid-range shot, but I mean, really, it's post-ups and free throws for Timmy Allen. He's not a shooting threat, not a guy that's going to shoot the three very much, if at all. But he's good on the offensive glass and creating second chance opportunities for his team. And so this is the guy, man. Texas Tech has done it for the most part all season. Obviously, they had a little bit of a slip up when they let Ochai Agbaji shoot 37 points at Allen Fieldhouse, but there's just only so much you can do about that guy. I mean, I think he's the best player in college basketball right now. But you're going to have to limit Allen if you want to win this game. I mean, plain and simple, he is such a huge part of their offense that if you're able to take him away, I don't know where they get points from.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing for them. And Timmy Allen, thankfully, has been really consistent for what they're trying to do in their sense. But at the same time, he's still not someone that has like the most diverse bag. He's not someone that's going to shoot 40% from three on sustained efficiency, not really much of a pull up threat. I will say his playmaking out of the post can be very impressive at times. And he's certainly a weapon passing the ball. But at the same time, like, your strategy to stopping Timmy Allen is as simple as just making sure that you do what you've done against pretty much every other post threat that Tech has faced. I mean, he's like Drew Timme, but if you consider Drew Timme to be a lot slower paced offense than Gonzaga, without the cutters that Gonzaga has, without quite as much post nimbleness. So Tech has had this style of game planning before, and Timmy Allen's a really talented offensive player, and I think his defense has come along this year to be a really good surprise for Texas. But certainly, I mean, among the bigs that Tech has faced, I wouldn't say that he's the most dangerous per se, but in terms of importance, it's hard to find a team that relies on a big as much as Texas relies on Timmy Allen. And it's not just the scoring, but also the playmaking. And fortunately for them, like I mentioned, he's been consistent every single game outside of the very first one against Houston Baptist. He's had a positive BPM. He's been decent at times about not turning the ball over, and that's something that you see a lot of in post-centric bigs that are good playmakers. But for him, he's really where they run a lot of their offense through, and especially out of the post. So it's going to be important for Tech to be able to stop him. And I think that if you can do that, then they're going to be kind of in scramble mode, especially because they haven't utilized Trey Mitchell like I feel like they probably could, and because their guards have been very inconsistent.
Yeah, so let's talk about those guards for a second there, because I think that as Texas Tech fans have watched Texas basketball over the last few years, I mean, so many people have just gotten sick of watching the trio of guards play because they have been so talented. Obviously, you lost a face and you got a new one, but there are still three really dominant guards on this roster. You've got Marcus Carr, the transfer from Minnesota, one of the best scorers in college basketball, I think, in terms of just raw talent that hasn't always manifested itself at Texas this season. He is playing a ton of their minutes, so I think he's playing like 74% of the team's minutes right now, which is just nuts. He gets used a lot, but he can be really inefficient at times, both with shooting and with the turnovers. You've got Andrew Jones. He's been in a rough stretch lately. I think he might have gotten COVID and been in protocols for a little bit, and he just hasn't really been the same since. And then obviously you've got Courtney Ramey, who Texas Tech fans will be plenty familiar with. He's been shooting the ball really well lately, and just continues to do kind of Courtney Ramey things, putting the ball in the basket, not necessarily being that standout creator, but being a really good shot maker. And so, I mean, for me, I've become so accustomed to the three guard Texas look. Chris Beard's taking a little bit of a different spin on this team, especially in the last couple of games. We've seen Andrew Jones kind of go to the bench as he's been dealing with COVID, and now Chris Beard, the starting five that we've seen in the last three games for Texas is Courtney Ramey at the 1 or the 2, Marcus Carr at the 1 or the 2, Trey Mitchell, Christian Bishop, and Timmy Allen. That is a large lineup.
Yeah, that would be the equivalent of Tech throwing out Bryson Williams, Kevin O'Banner, and Marcus Santos Silva in the lineup. Like, I mean, look, I've been talking about how Texas needs to utilize Trey Mitchell more, and they still haven't really. Like, even with them playing that three big lineup, you look at the game against Tennessee, and Mitchell still only played 17 minutes. But I mean, I guess some of it's been Andrew Jones just struggling as of late, and I kind of get that. But at the same time, I mean, it's just a really strange time of year, and they still play Brock Cunningham. So, which to be fair, they don't have the wings. So you kind of have to go with a three guard or a three big lineup unless you want to play Brock Cunningham 30 minutes a night. But at the same time, like, I don't know, it's just strange how Beard's been doing this lineup because there's so much like talent there, but at the same time, when you don't have the three guards playing consistently and the three bigs and Big 12 play is always going to be exploited just because you can't afford to play big when you have so many small ball teams. It's kind of confusing, but we'll see how it works, I guess.
And the teams that they've been doing it against is even like a more interesting decision. Like, I guess it's because your hand is forced and you're like, Andrew Jones is struggling. He's clearly not fully healthy. We've got to do something. But to run this lineup against TCU and Tennessee is just nuts to me. And for that to work, like it's worked.
Yeah, the TCU game especially. I mean, TCU is one of the most athletic teams out there, and you watch their style of play, and they gave LSU fits whenever LSU tried to go big, and somehow with Texas, it worked for them. And I mean, that's just one of those things where I'm not sure what the thought process behind it is, but if it works out, it works out. And I guess I hope they continue to use that lineup coming into Lubbock because I have a feeling that Mark Adams is going to have something pretty nice cooked up for that.
Yeah, I don't think that that's a good offensive lineup at all. I mean, this Texas offense, I already put my cards on the table. I don't think it's good. Going three big is not a great strategy to do that. And I think that the numbers would agree with me well. I mean, in the Tennessee game and the Oklahoma State game, they were sub 1 points per possession. I mean, they have not looked great. They don't shoot the ball well to begin with, as I mentioned, but even on the inside, they haven't been great. That TCU game, they were not great on the inside either, but they still shut the ball really well in that one and protected the ball. What's been really interesting to me with this lineup and how it uses it and how it's like played out on the court has been the turnovers. And I think that this is a really, really, really interesting thing to watch for the Texas game. We're going to give our keys to the game and our predictions in tomorrow's episode. Obviously, for it being game day, we want to leave that for tomorrow. But I just can't look over this point. Texas is turning the ball over a lot with this lineup. Against Oklahoma State and Tennessee, they had a turnover rate above 30%. They had not had one above 30% the entire season before then. They've done that in 2 of the last 3 games. If they run this lineup and Mark Adams' defense can force turnovers, this is going to be a very, very interesting game. I'm not sure that Beard will stick with this lineup for that reason alone. Like, I just think that you have to look at that and move away with how well that Texas Tech has forced turnovers. But that's kind of my teaser thought. You've got to watch this lineup with the turnovers.
Yeah, and if you look individually too, the 3 bigs combined for 11 turnovers in that last game. So, I mean, that's just crazy. And I think that with the amount of pressure the Tech has put on post-centric players, especially if you're going to run your offense through Timmy Allen, you better have good spacing around him and good ball handlers to kind of offset the fact that Tech is going to be putting a lot of pressure on forcing him to make the right reads and the right passes. So, I mean, once again, I hope they run that lineup because I think that is something that the Tech can force into their own advantage and make life difficult for Texas. But we'll see, man. I mean, either way, there's not a lot that Texas can do to maximize the offensive potential if Andrew Jones is struggling, and even with Marcus Carr not quite being what you really expected him to be as a primary ball handler.
It's a really interesting team, and I wish that we could talk about them for another hour, but we will spare your ears, and instead we will return tomorrow with a more in-depth kind of preview of this game, what we think will happen, what we think the response to Chris Beard will be. I've got a great guest today, but we'll save it till tomorrow. In the meantime, until we drop that episode, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow me at rmainvillelbk. You can follow Emery at eraser41, and you can follow the official Locked On Texas Tech Twitter page at Locked On TTU. Follow and subscribe to our feeds wherever you listen. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you have not already. It helps us out a lot. We would love to get some more viewers over there that can leave us comments on our very surprising appearances. But thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. And be sure to make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q with expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all platforms. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow.